What's good everybody, this is CP and welcome to a very special video. Hopefully the next 8 to 10 minutes will help you win your fantasy leagues this year. Today, let's take a look at the top NHL players to draft for the 2022-23 fantasy hockey season. I'll try to predict some of the top players for all major fantasy hockey categories, along with potential dark horse candidates and breakout players. Starting with shots on goal. This is one of the easiest fantasy categories to find good to elite hockey players, as history shows that players that finish near the top of the shots on goal category are usually top 40 overall fantasy players in most standard leagues as well. If we take a look at the top 10 list from last year, you can tell that most of these players will once again be somewhere near the top, especially Auston Matthews, Alex Ovechkin, Connor McDavid, and Nathan MacKinnon. Also, looking back at the past 5 NHL seasons, you can see that Ovechkin, Matthews, and MacKinnon consistently finish first in this category. So in my opinion, those 3 are probably some of the safest picks you can go with, especially if you want someone elite in the shots on goal department. On the other hand, I feel like Brady Tkachuk of the Ottawa Senators and Kirill Kaprizov of the Minnesota Wild are also pretty safe up-and-coming players, as I see them as younger NHL players on the rise for this category, who might actually have a shot to stay near the top 10 or even top 5 for the next few seasons. Zooming out into the top 20. I feel like Roman Josi of the Nashville Predators is a special player to target as well, as he was the only defenseman to finish in the top 20 last year in shots on goal, with a total of 280 shots in 80 games. Besides that, Alex DeBrincat, Leon Draisaitl, and Jake Guentzel are 3 other forwards I feel like have potential to break into the top 10 this season. All had at least 40 goals last year, has the shooter mindset, and consistently been elite snipers in the NHL over the past few seasons. So if you want to target a player with a high shot count, it's really hard to go wrong with either DeBrincat, Draisaitl, or Guentzel. Going further down the list, a few even younger players with the upside to be the biggest risers in this category includes Jason Robertson of the Dallas Stars and Joel Eriksson Ek of the Minnesota Wild. Both finished with career years last season and top 50 in shots on goal, and is only getting better with more NHL experience. There's also a good chance that these guys will still be available in most of your fantasy drafts after the McDavids, Matthews, Ovechkins, and McKinnons are gone off your draft board, so definitely keep an eye out for someone like Robertson or Eriksson Ek. Moving on to assists. Assists is another super important fantasy category, especially if you want to build a strong offensive team in your leagues this year. Only 14 players in the entire NHL had 60 assists or more last season. So if you had 2 or 3 of the top 20 assist guys, you actually had a pretty good chance of dominating this category last year. If you take a look at the top 10 from last year, you'll see that there's a good mix of centers, wingers, and defensemen. So unlike shots on goal, you don't really have to target one particular position to get your top assist guys. Out of everyone in the top 10, I feel like JT Miller and Victor Hedman might be the riskier picks, as they set amazing career highs in apples last year and might have a tough time to double down on last season. Although Johnny Gaudreau and Jonathan Huberdeau were both top 3 players in assists last year, I feel like their assist numbers might actually take a hit this year, since they're joining new teams and it might take them at least half a year to build new chemistry with completely new teammates and line mates. So going into this season, if I had to pick 2 blue chip guys to go after in the assist category, I would probably have to stick with Connor McDavid and Artemi Panarin. I feel like these 2 players are in the best fantasy situations to build on last season and remain legit top 10 or even top 5 players in this category. Zooming out into the top 20, I feel like 3 young players that could take another step forward this year includes Quinn Hughes, Mitch Marner, and Cale Makar. All barely in their prime and still have a lot of upside and youth to take their game to the next level. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised to see any of Hughes, Marner's, or Makar break into the top 10 for assists as early as next season. 2 other more proven players we can't forget about are Nathan MacKinnon and Sidney Crosby. Both played less than 70 games last year and still managed to finish top 30 in this category. So if they stay healthy this year and play closer to 75 games, the stats show they have a pretty good chance to finish in the top 15 or top 20 this year. In terms of underrated dark horse candidates to have on your watch watch list, you might want to keep an eye on Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou of the St. Louis Blues. Thomas quietly finished last year with 57 assists and was ranked 19th in this category. Meanwhile, Kyrou finished 35th with a total of 48 assists in 74 games. As many NHL fans would agree, these two players might not have reached their NHL ceiling yet, and since they play in a smaller market like St. Louis, there's a good chance that they're going to get overlooked in a lot of drafts and drop a few rounds to make them potential solid steals. Moving on to goals. Perhaps the most important category in fantasy hockey, scoring can single-handedly win you a lot of leagues. Only 4 players in the entire NHL scored 50 or more goals last year. And get this, only 7 had 45 goals or more. So if you don't draft your scoring early, it will be very hard to compete against other managers, unless you can find a handful of 25 to 30 goal players to fill out the rest of your roster and later in the draft. As the stats show, 2 of the most dominant players you can go after in this category are Alexander Ovechkin and Auston Matthews. Ovi has dominated scoring and finished first in goals from 2012 to 2019, and to me it looks like Matthews is going to be the cream of the crop for the foreseeable future. Besides that, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Steven Stamkos are 3 other pretty safe names to target for scoring, as they have consistently finished in the top 10 or top 5 for the past 4 to 5 years. One thing I want to point out is that every year, 2 to 3 players surprises the league, comes out of nowhere and breaks into the top 10. A few examples from last season includes Chris Kreider of the New York Rangers, Matt Duchene of the Nashville Predators, and Kyle Connor of the Winnipeg Jets. So based on last year's stats, be extra careful about overdrafting these non-household scoring names, as they might have a tough time repeating their one amazing season. A few underrated names that could be perennial top 20 goal scorers in my books includes Jason Robertson, Alex DeBrincat, Rupe Hintz, and Tage Thompson. Compared to the other bigger names like Matthews, McDavid, and Ovechkin, I feel like these players might fall under the radar a little bit, but still have a good chance to give you good to elite numbers in goals next year. 2 potential bounce back candidates I like on my watch list includes Nathan MacKinnon and Brad Marchand. Both missed time last year, played less than 70 games, but still managed to get 32 goals apiece. If they can stay healthy, history shows that these guys are capable of putting up 35 to 40 goals in a good year. So it might not be a bad idea to go after these guys, especially if they slip in some of your fantasy drafts. Moving on to power play points. This category is most closely associated with points. As you can see, the top power play point players in the league last year were also near the top of the list for total points. To me, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl of the Edmonton Oilers are in the class of their own here, as they play on one of the most dominant power plays in the league and don't look like they will be slowing down anytime soon. Meanwhile, players like Artemi Panarin, Steven Stamkos, and Mikko Rantanen are also considered pretty safe picks in my books. If you can see the trend here, a good way to draft safe players that can perform on the power play is to go after guys that plays on a good team with a very efficient power play unit. You can also find potential sleepers in guys that get to see first unit power play time with talented all-stars. In my eyes, defensemen like Cale Makar, Victor Hedman, and Adam Falk are 3 of the best players you can go after, as they quarterback some of the best power plays in the NHL and will have plenty of opportunities to get easy points throughout the season. Another trick I like to use is go after some of the best playmakers in the game, as there's a good chance that they will also be the primary playmakers on their team's power play unit. A few that comes to mind includes Patrick Kane, Sidney Crosby, William Nylander, Mitch Marner, and Kirill Kaprizov. Most of those guys were top 30 players in power play points last year and should continue to put up numbers and probably won't get removed from their team's power play units anytime soon. Moving on to hits. This is perhaps the most interesting fantasy category with the biggest risk to reward ratio. The top 5 players in the league in hits last year included Radko Gudas, Tanner Janot, Ryan Reeves, Luke Shen, and Brady Tkachuk. Notice how only 2 of those 5 players put up over 20 goals and 40 points last year. Zooming out, if we look at the top 10, I would say only maybe 3 of those players are worth keeping in most standard fantasy hockey leagues. As a result, this makes a player like Brady Tkachuk super rare in fantasy hockey, as he has the ability to not only put up elite numbers in hits, but also gives you above average stats in goals, assists, and points. So if you want to dominate in hits, but not be stuck with too many one-dimensional players, then my advice would be to try your best to draft guys that can contribute in at least one other fantasy category. So besides Tkachuk, a few of these fantasy unicorns you might want to have on your watch list includes Tanner Janot, Tom Wilson, Marcus Foligno, Matthew Tkachuk, and Evander Kane. Moving on to blocks. This is another important but often overlooked category in fantasy hockey. Brayden McNabb, Jacob Trouba, Calvin DeHaan were top 3 players in NHL last year, finishing the season with over 170 blocks apiece. As you can see, everyone in the top 10, all of them were defensemen. But at the same time, there were also fantasy hockey players that were ranked outside of the top 50 to 75. So in my opinion, there's really no need to go after high block guys early in your drafts, as most can be found much later. Much like hits, some of the top block guys can be a bit one-dimensional. So it's best to try to go after defensemen who can give you at least 8 to 10 goals and 30 points a year. On top of that, blocks is one of the hardest fantasy categories to predict. Since there's so much fluctuation year over year, I'm not going to go out and say this guy's going to finish in the top 5 for sure. But in my opinion, the general rule of thumb is to go after a player who is a high usage top 4 defenseman on their team, who has the ability to average over 22 minutes a night, and is also a part of their team's penalty killing unit. If I had to choose, I would probably go after defenders on stronger teams, since they won't be helmed in their own zone as much and have a better chance to put up some offensive stats such as shots on goal, assists, and points, and are less likely to single-handedly ruin your fantasy team's plus-minus ratings. Do you agree or disagree with everything I said in this video? Make sure you let me know in the comments below. And if you like, feel free to call me out as well. If you want to watch more of my crappy videos, then make sure you click the links on the side right here.